Good evening, and welcome to the Harker Speaker Series. I'm Joshua Martinez, Chair of Visual Art at the Harker School for grades 6 through 12. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event, a conversation between the 24-25 Dickinson Visual Artist in Residence, Connie Zheng, and curator Nidhi Gandhi. Our speaker series has been bringing experts and visionaries to Harker since 2007, and we're thrilled to include the Dickinson Artist in Residence among the speakers for the last 3 years. We hope you will also join us in January when we have the poet Nikki Giovanni giving a talk as part of our annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. There are flyers in the lobby with information about her visit. The Dickinson Visual Artist Residency Program brings practicing contemporary artists to exhibit and work with our students on special projects. Our goal is to connect our students to the breadth of art practices and ways of seeing that exist beyond the bounds of the Harker School. I would like to thank Pam Dickinson for the generous gift that created this program. This year's Visual Artist in Residence is Connie Zheng. Connie is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and filmmaker who is creating a diverse body of works that include painting and collage, filmmaking, and social practice, and focuses on the intersection of memory, culture, and place. She has exhibited work at the Peabody Essex Museum, San Francisco Asian Art Museum, and recently Bay Area Now 9 at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Her work is held in the permanent collection at the Cottis Foundation, and the 2 large-scale maps in the exhibition are on loan from the David Rumsey Map Center at Stanford University. She holds a BA in Economics and English from Brown University, an MFA in Art Practice from UC Berkeley, and is a PhD candidate in Visual Studies at UC Santa Cruz. It has been a privilege to co-curate this residency and exhibition with Nidhi Gandhi, a Harker School alum who graduated in 2011, who will be interviewing Connie on stage tonight. Nidhi is a curatorial and programs associate at the San Jose Museum of Art and an independent arts curator focusing on Black and Brown diasporic communities. She holds a bachelor's degree in neuroscience from Pomona College and an MA in history of art from Williams College. Connie will first present about her practice, and then she and Nidhi will have a conversation. Harker students have contributed questions that Nidhi will ask. If anyone in the audience has additional questions, we encourage you to ask them during the reception that follows in the lobby outside. After the talk, please take a moment to see Connie's exhibition just past the lobby on the lower floor of this building. The work that the upper school students produced in her workshops is on display on the upper floor, and the work from the other campuses are on display on those respective campuses. A friendly reminder to turn off your phones so your fellow audience members won't be disturbed by either ringtones or photographs. And please welcome to the stage Nidhi Gandhi and Connie Zheng. All right.
Hi. So by the way, Connie will be giving a short presentation first on her artwork in the show and a few core themes, and then we'll start the Q&A part of this event tonight.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you all for being here. So as Josh mentioned in his introduction, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and experimental filmmaker based out of the East Bay. And I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes. Just to give an overview of my work. I generally like to start presentations with some images of my studio because I think it provides an immediate glimpse into the multidisciplinary nature of my practice, which is pretty heavily research and process driven, as you can see by all the detritus on my work tables and the books that I generally have around me. As an artist, I do all sorts of things. I make large-scale maps, some of which you'll see in the hallway in this building. I write essays. I make stop-motion films, which I develop into immersive audiovisual installations, often using sound recordings that I take myself. And in the past, I've also made dystopian fake documentaries and installed them in unorthodox objects, such as planter boxes and laundry carts. I have facilitated group design workshops with communities in San Francisco Chinatown, and also many classrooms and some museums around the Bay Area. On the broadest level, I would say that my work often deals with the porous interface between memory, culture, and place, as mentioned in the introduction. And my artistic practice is rooted in a diasporic sense of home and an awe for how dynamic places can be. I attribute these interests to my experiences of growing up between the cultures of China and the United States, and the emotional whiplash that I often experience of constantly moving between these different home spaces and finding my sense of home redefined. For my residency at Harker, I had the joy and the privilege of working with students at the middle and upper schools who created over 100 ceramic seeds in response to the prompt, if you could have any seeds with you at the end of this world and the start of a new one, what would they be? So students made some really amazing seeds, many of which were, of course, delicious looking fruit and vegetable seeds, but they also made some really amazing, fantastical seeds, like seeds for knowledge, seeds for sweet dreams, a horseshoe, among other creations. And these works are part of an ongoing participatory sculpture project titled Seed Almanac, which I started in 2019 and adapted this year specifically for my residency at Harker. There's a corresponding exhibition of middle school student work at the middle school campus as well. The students' clay seeds, which you can find upstairs, are interspersed alongside 60 drawings on the main wall, which consists of two kinds of maps. So there, at the center of this arrangement is a large map, which you can see students working on here, and it's a map of the Harker Upper School campus, which was, which includes a lot of students and faculty personal landmarks, but also where they would like to plant their speculative seeds. Next to, so the big map is sort of the center of the arrangement, and fanning out from it radially are smaller personal maps that were made by each student, which show places of importance to the students and where they might want to see their seeds flourish. And I highly encourage you to check out the student exhibition if you haven't already seen it. The student maps are really amazing, and the seeds are incredibly imaginative, funny, and thoughtful. Since 2019, many of my artistic projects have worked symbolically with seeds as containers for navigating complicated emotions around environmental crisis and the continued weight of history, which was how this project, Seed Almanac, started originally. So over the past 5 years, I participants in workshops at schools and arts organizations like the Asian Art Museum, the Headland Center for the Arts, UC Berkeley, and Stanford have made over 300 clay seeds, which I've installed in a variety of ways. Other seed-focused projects include seeds of maps of seed migrations, like this one here, speculative seed exchanges, community garden installations, such as this one I made for a festival in Chinatown last year, virtual greenhouses, paintings that reimagine the night sky as filled with plants for my garden, paintings of seeds as these mutant gods, and short experimental films about searching for seeds. Working with seeds over the past few years has been a way for me to not get mired in paralyzing despair when having conversations about climate change, and instead to focus on growth, healing, and nourishment amidst conditions of uncertainty and precarity. For the next part of this presentation, I'd like to talk more about my map work and another main theme that ties a lot of these projects together. My maps tend to be rooted in local histories that often link outwards into global histories and networks of migration, commerce, and environmental pollution, which is of course tied to commerce. So this map is called Land of Opportunity. It's on display on this floor. It's in the map collection at Stanford, so there's a digitized version online, which you can look at as well. And this is a map of the 43 most well-documented toxic sites in the Bay Area, many of which are actually in Silicon Valley. And And so this map shows not just toxic sites, but also local environmental activism and remediation efforts. And so you can kind of think of it as a map of both, with sort of two mirror narratives. It's a map of contamination, but also repair. And despite our reputation for being one of the quote-unquote greenest places in the United States, the Bay Area actually, sadly, has one of the highest concentrations of Superfund sites in the country. And if you're not familiar with what a Superfund site is, it's a designation made by the EPA for places that are so contaminated that the US government has to take ownership for the cleanup. Another piece that's on the first floor of this building in the show is a map called How to Make a Golden State. And it's a map that's about 9 feet long that shows Asian farm worker history in California over the past 200 years. It shows how Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, Korean, South Asian, Vietnamese, Lao, and Hmong farm workers have been crucial to helping, to building up the state's agricultural industry and infrastructure since the 1800s, often alongside Chicanx and Latinx workers. As you might be able to get a sense of at this point, double-sidedness and duality and sort of mirror narratives are often defining characteristics of my maps and my creative work as a whole. Maps are fascinating to me because they're one of the oldest interfaces for human interaction with our environments. Without a map, most of us would have trouble knowing how to orient ourselves to an unfamiliar place. And I love making maps because they have so much possibility for reorienting ourselves to our environment in ways that might feel alien to us at first, but can help us to see an old, familiar landscape anew. Maps, I think, can teach us how to locate ourselves in a place, not just geographically, but also socially, emotionally, and politically. They can teach us to relate to places in ways that can actually change the landscape for both good and bad. And finally, I'll end here by talking briefly about a community-based site-specific project called Table to Farm, which I initiated as part of a residency through the Chinese Culture Center's 41 Ross Space in San Francisco. This was a project that invited visitors to flip the script, so to speak, on thinking about farm-to-table pathways by centering a diasporic Asian perspective and also by centering San Francisco Chinatown. During my residency, I organized public programs such as a film screening, actually numerous film screenings, a crowdsourced map of food supply chains in Chinatown, and a community design workshop where I worked with residents to design mooncakes for the Mid-Autumn Festival, which culminated in a mooncake party for that holiday. And this work was a kind of homecoming for me because it was the first time I actively worked in Chinatown and got to know a lot of its residents, even though I lived next to Chinatown for 5 years and about a decade ago. And through this residency, I got to know business owners and neighbors I'd pass by every day for 5 years, but I'd never had a conversation with. And the community that formed in support of this project was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And so to come full circle, every time I work on a project that's rooted in a particular community, it's like being part of a garden. And the project is just the latest seed to have grown from the soil of that community. A seed is both the product of a harvest and the beginning of a new cycle of growth. It links together generations, and its continuation is impossible without the support of its ecosystem. And so I am honored and delighted to be up here in front of y'all and to have received the support of the ecosystem of the school and everyone who made this residency a really special, lovely experience. So thank you.
Connie, thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your works. It's been such a joy and honor to bring these works by you from the last 5 years of your practice together on view here, but also to see what you've been doing with our students here and the way you've adapted the Seed Almanac project for them. I think a great place to start is thinking about everything that you just talked about here. It really solidifies for me the title that you chose for this exhibition, Mapping Our Way Home. And I see in the way you're talking about each work, how every single word in that title means something and is really critical. Could you talk a little bit more about how you chose the title and why this title, really?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. I do like to think a lot about words, especially as a writer, and so yeah, I think one of the most important things for me when thinking about the title was to emphasize that it's a process. Like every show is a process, like every work that I make, it's not like even when it's being displayed, it's not necessarily like final, even if it's because each it's like everything that we do is just part of an ongoing process. And so I think for me, like, it's really important to think about mapping too as a process, like a method of wayfinding, and to really emphasize that these maps are sort of just one endpoint in this ongoing process of continuing to learn how to relate to the place, this place that is home for me, California. And so, yeah, and also how like making maps are often also ways for us to locate ourselves and to sort of find a home for ourselves as well. And so this like sense of this like ongoingness, the ongoing process of finding a home, of making a home for yourself is really crucial for me, and it's something that I wanted to emphasize through the framing of the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's so poignant to me too, because so I went to Harker, and so in some way, this is the first time I've been helping with the Artist in Residence program here, and I helped select you. And so being able to come back to kind of a version of my home too, where I spent most of my childhood and adolescence, has been really amazing. And then to see how you've been working with the K-12 students and imagining, wow, if I had had an artist in residence while I was here in the middle school or upper school, how that would kind of have influenced my thinking as a creative. It's really special. And so I was really thinking about this project that you've done, the workshops that you've done with the students. It's an adaptation of something you've already been doing out in the public. I'm really curious, what have you had to adapt? Have you had any experiences through these workshops that have been really surprising to you and working with our community at Harker?
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. It's been so much fun. The students here are incredible, so smart and funny. And so normally I do this workshop with college students, and I think one of the, and I definitely prefer to work with students for this project over adults, for sure. And so, yeah, I think, I like the support that I've received from the faculty here has been so incredible. Like we've had all these, I've met with the faculty from, like lower school, middle school, and upper school faculty like numerous times in the process of developing this project and like adapting it for Harker. And I think, when I was, I was initially like a little nervous about how well the concept would translate, and everyone assured me like, no, our students will get it. And they totally did. Like I actually ran it quite similarly to how I've run it in colleges, and just kind of changing the framing a little bit. But yeah, like the seeds that the students have made have been really amazing, and I feel like renewed hope every single time I work on this project, and I felt renewed hope like every time at the end of one of these workshops. And I think the main way that I've changed it this time is actually like the introduction of the map making exercise with the students. That is a new, that's like a remix specifically for Harker. And one of the reasons why we landed on that was because we wanted to find a way to tie in the map work in my show along with the seed almanac seed making workshops. And so I think it was my first time facilitating like a map making exercise with students, and it was incredible to see what everyone made. Like the maps that the students made are so cool, and I really encourage you to check them out.
Yeah, I think the maps also are, the way you worked in the maps are so aligned with the way you run your practice, the way you are as an artist. I mean, I'm so glad you got to talk about Table to Farm, which is on view. There's some documentation footage in the hallway that you can see, because it really is about this kind of awareness of the community and what the community needs. A lot of people might, in the art world, we call it social practice, but when it is really a community-based practice. So what are the questions that you ask yourself when you're diving into a community? Like when you were working with Harker and making changes to this project, or when you're doing something like Table to Farm, what are the questions you ask yourself about how to make it for that community?
Well, I think the way that you frame the question is sort of like the key for me, which is like, how is this project for the community? Because it's really common or maybe I shouldn't say common, but it happens in the arts where an artist will go into a community and sort of just continue to replicate the work that they've been doing in a very different community. And it can cause serious problems when, you're just kind of imposing your point of view on a community, which, who often have their own needs and questions and interests and desires. And so I think, like every single community-based project that I've worked on, it always starts with a lot of conversations. It starts with just getting to know sort of like the atmosphere, the like ecosystem of the place, like what are things that are important for the folks in this community, why, like really it's sort of like why, like how would a quote unquote art project be valuable or interesting for them? Because that answer could really change depending on where you are. And so, I think for Table to Farm, like that was a month long conversation before we even started the workshop. And like I would not have thrown myself necessarily into like a community mooncake design workshop without knowing a little bit something about Chinatown and like how important the Mid-Autumn Festival is, And so, and then through those conversations, I started to see how excited people were getting about that project and how excited a lot of the residents were about the prospect of, designing a custom mooncake that would be produced by local bakeries for the festival. Yeah, it was a similar sort of process for the residency here. I kind of talked with Nidhi and Josh about projects I've done before and how, whether or not they would adapt. And I think, then when I saw like the interest that people were showing in, this sort of collective seed making project, that was a good sort of like green light for me.
Yeah, I think also it's so interesting how easily you snap into a community too. And I think what also kind of lends itself to thinking about that is like all the different ways you're working across artistic practice. So you're bringing in maps, you're bringing in field recordings, you're, I don't know if you have slides of this, but like you're going to the bay and making cyanotypes with the water that's coming in the bay. So there's this kind of way that you're not just working with communities as in people, and, you know, who are you? What's your identity? What ties you together? But also, like, you're working with scientists, you're working with historians, you're working with kind of these, like, multifaceted ways of thinking about the world. And it must be, I mean, to me, that's a very hard thing to bridge together. And I was curious, you know, in something like Table to Farm, or maybe talking about your maps, which are bridging together so many different kinds of ways of thinking about the world. How do you approach that, bringing all those skill or diverse interdisciplinary fields together into one single artwork?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. I mean, I feel like just becoming an artist was like kind of a game changer for me in terms of like allowing myself to think in this very interdisciplinary way, because my undergrad majors were actually in economics and English, and I trained to be a journalist, and so I think, yeah, I think like just being someone who is very curious about a lot of things that I have absolutely no expertise in, and like I love the process of like sort of, yeah, of like learning deeply about the things that I'm interested in, and so I think like once I learned in graduate school, like really how to be an interdisciplinary artist, and how that is not only okay, but can be a really exciting thing, and can help, you know, the like viewers sort of see new connections between things. I think that, yeah, like that kind of help me give myself permission to like actually, yeah, be an amateur in like 100 different things, and yeah, and I think also because I, in previous jobs, I actually used to work as a researcher. I worked at a research agency many years ago, and through that I had a lot of clients who worked, yeah, clients in like many different sectors, and I think through my like research work, you know, I had to kind of learn about like all of our clients in a very short amount of time. So I had like government clients, I had like tech clients, I had clients like museum clients, and yeah, and when you're, you know, I had like a real estate client. And so if you're, yeah, when you're working with like people in so many different fields in many different ways, you kind of like develop these skills of learning how to like adapt to different fields very quickly. And so, yeah, I think that I think that professional experience was probably, has served me in very interesting ways, in ways I didn't expect through my artistic practice, and this, constant sort of like rhizomatic or like network way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've talked a little bit too about how, you know, you take all those different influences and all those different experiences and ways of working with people and pulling them together in one piece. It is like a different form of collage. Like if you, and also, you know, you're saying you're an amateur, but anyone who's looking at Connie's maps, I mean, they're just beautiful pieces of very skilled articulations of, you know, research and watercolor and a skill with, you know, a paintbrush and with the hand. But in that you really are, there's like this way you're adapting, I think, this art kind of form of collage, which is where you take these disparate elements and pull them together into a cohesive work that you're really playing with too. We've talked a little bit about that. So.
Yeah, and thank you for making that observation. That collage is, if I had to say there's sort of like one main like visual language that I rely on a lot, it's probably collage. And so like I think of the maps as, you know, I mean the maps are materially collages because I'm sort of collaging different materials together, but I also think of my maps as sort of collages of different forms of like public testimony and witnessing. I rely on like I draw from a pretty wide range of research material when I'm making the maps. So for example, the map of Asian farm worker history that's in the hall, that took about a year of research to compile. And so I look through, so it include, like the source materials include not only books, but also academic journal articles, oral histories, like different databases, museum, library, archives, and news articles. And like it was a similar process for the map of Land of Opportunity, the map of toxic sites in the Bay Area. And so like for that one, like the archive for that include, the sources that I use include not only the official EPA archive, but also like local newspapers, local interviews. And so I think it's really important to sort of like weave together both like official and unofficial sources in a lot of the maps that I make, because often the map has such like authority, and it often only shows the official testimony. And so I think, like collaging together different forms of like testimony as well is really interesting to me. And similarly, like I think about like films as collaging time, voice, narrative. I think about the participatory sculpture projects that I do, like the Seed Almanac seed making project. Like that's sort of like a collage of hundreds of people's different ideas. And I really, like I think this like notion of like relationality, provisionality, like networked thinking is sort of central to all of my work.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good jumping point to ask some questions that were submitted by students, because one of the student questions was about how in contrast to what you're doing with maps, they were asking about how you think about seeds, and what you came to, like what got you excited and interested in seeds in the first place. I have a couple of answers to that question, and it's a question that I receive a lot, and so I did prepare some images. So this is a photo of my grandpa, my yeye, my dad's dad, in his rooftop garden in Fuzhou, which is in southern China. And this is a picture from 2018. He actually can't go up there anymore because it's actually quite hard to access. And so this, I think my discovery of this garden about 10 years ago is a major reason why I began incorporating plants so much into my creative work. And so here's a photo of him climbing up this dark shaft to get to the garden. And so he's been cultivating this garden on the roof of the apartment building my dad's family has been living in since the 1980s. And despite having stayed in this apartment for weeks at a time since I was 14, I did not know about this garden until 10 years ago, when my uncle offhandedly mentioned that my grandpa was going on the roof to garden. He would often disappear for hours at a time, and I had no idea what he was doing. Like I thought he was playing mahjong with his friends. I thought he was out for a really long smoke break. It was like, and I never thought to ask what he was up to. I was never like, "Oh, Grandpa, where are you going?" I was like, "Oh, he's just doing his thing," and I was very self-absorbed in the way that many young people are. And I don't mean that as a dig. It's really just like, when you're young, your world is you. Yeah, like when I was in my 20s, I was finally like, what is he doing? And my uncle was like, oh, he's going to his garden. And so this, even though this garden kind of covers like half the rooftop, you can actually only access it through this little like cupboard right next to the kitchen sink. So there's no like proper door to get to it. And so I have a little video that I took earlier, like this summer, of how to get to the garden. So the sink is kind of like below that, and
And so you get up here, and the first time I visited this, there's no railing. Like my grandpa would just be up here with no railing. And and so now my uncle takes care of it. But you can see it's this kind of like, it's like an explosion of green. There's a mango tree, there's a pitaya tree, there's numerous fig trees, there's a pomegranate tree, like orange trees, and so because through this experience, like plants for me like deeply represent how like the ways in which we never truly know a place or a person, and how there's always a world within a world that we think we know. And seeds are like that, you know, like seeds, seeds are the most amazing technology. Like they hold like everything in it. And so I used to work at the Exploratorium, and I often would sign up to do the botany demos with students. And one of the questions that students would ask all the time, or not just students, like even like toddlers would ask all the time was, if I was showing them a seed, they would ask, is it dead? And I would, I didn't know how to answer that question, because it's like, are seeds alive? Are they dead? They're like very in between, they're in this like liminal middle space of living and non-living. And that sort of like sense of possibility is something that is so interesting to me. And so I think, that is sort of like an anchor for a lot of my interests in plants and seeds.
And I love that, because every time I see your little hybrid seed creatures, like they make appearances in the video on the LED wall, and you have a series called Mother, and every time I see them, I'm like, are they alive? Do they have agency? Do they have lives that exist outside of this kind of little drawing that Connie's made? And I think that kind of answers that all of these, hybrid seeds are, creatures that are kind of in the process of becoming alive, and are full of potential too.
Totally, yeah.
And, one of the student questions was, how did you come up with your artistic style? Like, how did you arrive where you're at and feel, I think to me, it's a question of how are you comfortable as an artist where you're at too?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've arrived, or
I don't know.
Is there more to do?
I feel like I'm in process of becoming still. It's just like you're never really finished growing, and you're never really finished changing. And I do feel like, I do think I've like arrived at a place where I am interested in my practice, and I know that's kind of like a weird thing to say, but it's I think I've kind of tried out like many different styles, and I think it's kind of it's an ongoing practice of kind of like learning what you're interested in, and that changes, depending on like what stage of life you're in. It depends on what's going on around you. It depends on the sort of the other work that is resonating with you at a particular moment, and what particular moments call for.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best answer I can give you to that question.
Would you talk a little more about what or who inspires you to keep making art, and what inspires you to start a new project, maybe?
Yeah, I feel like my inspirations are many, and it's hard to categorize them, but like definitely other artists are always inspiring for me. I have like a big sort of like slideshow that I kind of have, that I look at constantly, that has like hundreds and hundreds of images of other work that is really inspiring for me. I am inspired by activists' work. I'm inspired by like organizers on the ground doing really important sort of like movement work. I'm really inspired by like conversations with people in my life, and I know these are all sort of like, maybe they're kind of trite answers, but it's like I don't know, I try to be very like porous with my sources of inspiration. Sorry, what was the last part of that question?
Oh, I don't remember
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
But no, I think that what you're saying, though, is a really important reminder when we're talking about art making and we're talking about, how do students become artists? How do you become an artist? Especially, you have such a research-based practice. You are pulling together all these histories. It's important to remember that so much of your inspiration comes from your personal life, too. It's the things you're exposed to, the things that excite you in the world around you. And so, no, I think that's an important one. I think we have a little bit more time, so I'm actually going to jump back to a couple questions I have that were spawned from that, which is that you were talking about time earlier, too, and the way kind of time folds and time comes together. I think, your works, whether it's the seeds or the maps or video, fold together these, histories from the past, present experiences, hope for the future. And so I kind of wanted to, we're talking about what inspires you, what, keeps you invested in art. And I wanted to ask you, let's start with one. How do you approach the future since you work with really hard topics? You work with the environment, which is being so impacted by climate change. You're working with trying to unearth histories that haven't necessarily been told or privileged in the ways that they maybe should be. Those are really hard things to sit with. How do you think about the future with all of that?
Yeah, well, great question. Gosh, that's sometimes it's really difficult. Sometimes it's really hard to sit with it, especially when you see things going in a certain, in directions that, you're troubled by. And so I think for me, hope is kind of a process. It's an ongoing act, and it requires. I think of myself as maybe a hopeful pessimist. I think is. I don't think I came up with that term. I think that's from a Rebecca Solnit book. And but it's this sense that there, I think often in the United States, pessimism and optimism are kind of seen as very polar points of view, where an optimist is someone who thinks everything's okay and everything's going to be okay, and a pessimist is someone who is thinks everything is doomed and we're all screwed. And there's actually a middle place where you accept that there are a lot of things that have been awful or difficult, and you take that as your starting point, because there's always a new starting point, right? It's no matter what you have that has no matter what has happened, there's always a starting place. And so every point is a point of new beginning, and that. And I think that for me, just constantly remembering that there's constant points of new beginning is really helpful for me. I think also just remembering that, it's there are many people for whom the quote unquote apocalypse happened 500 years ago is really important as well. And that, people for whom, the quote unquote apocalypse happened 500 years ago, whether they're indigenous people or Africans who were enslaved, there was always a new point of beginning. And so, I think that is how I think about the future.
Yeah.
Is just, there's always a point of new beginning.
Yeah, I feel like that's really also a helpful way to approach your art. For someone who's maybe never seen your art before, and some of our audience members may never have seen any of Connie's work, so when you go outside, it might be your first experience with it. Could that be a helpful lens for them for approaching your work? Or is there something that, you would tell them to kind of look at or think about as they're approaching your work for the first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess encourage you to not feel like you need to absorb everything all at once. The maps are pretty dense. they take a lot of time to make, and it was a lot of research, and it can be kind of overwhelming at first. And so, I think just like approach it slowly, which is how I made it, and approach it with, hopefully some curiosity about places that you think you know. And I think that for me was the most important thing to enter into these projects with, because each of the maps that I've made starts with a question. And the map itself is kind of like a mapping or a document of my exploration or entrance into that question.
I think I'm gonna ask one more question, which is, I guess, kind of what's next. I'm curious if your time at Harker has done anything for your practice, if it's shifted anything in terms of what you're thinking about, but also thinking about, just generally, what's next for you, what's on the horizon.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Harker first and what the residency so far and the workshops and working with students done for you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I already mentioned this, and it's such like a cheesy response, but it really like gave me, it really like invigorated the sense of, or the optimistic parts of me. And I've been thinking a lot about imagination and how, like, the sort of different dimensions of imagination, because the way that we often think about imagination, especially in a school setting, is like, through like creativity in the arts, but there's like different forms of imagination. There's social imagination, there's political imagination, and you can even think of like economic imagination in a way. And so I think just seeing, and for, it's like, and if you were sort of like expand your definition of imagination, it also includes like what we assume to be possible, what we assume to be things that we can or cannot change. And that is always one of the most interesting parts of doing the seed making workshop for me, which is like trying to cultivate this space where impossible seeds can happen. And through that process of like allowing ourselves to make impossible things, like a seed of a cat, then, maybe that will, maybe that can create sort of like openings for talking about what else we can imagine as growable. Like when I've done this workshop with college students, like I often sort of like frame it even more conceptually, where, I'll sort of like think about, or I'll ask like participants to talk about, like what are things in the world around them that they want to be able to change. And so, like one way that I've like, one thing that comes up, is like, is like, what happens if we can grow like money? Like a lot of students make seeds of money, and that's very normal. But also if you think about it, it's like, it's not just like thinking about growing wealth, like in the sort of financial sense, but also like how, if we sort of like invert our thinking around it, when, like when Europeans first came to the North American continent, like people, they encountered like these food forests that the indigenous peoples of the Americas had cultivated. It was like food, like wealth was literally growing from trees. And so that kind of reframing, I think, is really important for me to sort of like encourage folks to think about. And and so I think that I've kind of been coming back to that, like what do we assume is possible and not possible? And how does that affect the way that we approach the world? What do we give ourselves, where do we think we have agency? And so I think I've been thinking a lot about that. Yeah. And and I'm working on a couple of new maps for some different projects.
That's exciting. Is there like anywhere that we can go see them potentially nearby or maybe far away? I know some of them are going to go on display pretty far away.
Like I'm working on a map that's going to be in Malaysia next year. But Roots the map of plant migrations around the world that's currently in Canada, but it'll be coming back for a show in San Francisco next year.
Okay, and one final question, because I can't help myself. What's your favorite seed that anyone's ever made?
Oh my God, oh that's really hard, because people have made some really amazing seeds. There's some really weird ones too, but yeah, I think one of my favorites that someone has made is a seed for old growth forests, which is so beautiful because it's so impossible, right? Like, and it's so earnest. Like an old growth forest, it has to be old. Like that's why it's called an old growth forest. But that desire to sort of preserve it through the seed, even though it's so impossible, is incredibly beautiful to me. So yeah, I'm really partial to the like very sincere, earnest, and like poetic seeds.
Thanks, Connie.
Thank you.
Connie, Nidhi, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Please join us out in the lobby for refreshments and to check out the exhibitions. And if you have any additional questions, absolutely feel free to ask them at that time. Thank you so much.